will welcome Heather up for her teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So you guys feeling all Christmassy? I think the rain does it at least a little, right? Like compared to the 80-degree California December weather we have, the rain is definitely, giving it that feel. Would you say that it is the most wonderful time of the year, or most merry and bright, or a holly jolly Christmas? I don't know if you know those words. Those are like the phrases, the key phrases in some songs. I looked up the lyrics to some of these famous Christmas songs, and the most wonderful time of the year, one of the verses says, "It's the most wonderful time of the year, with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you, be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of year. It's the happiest season of all." Or there's the Holly Jolly Christmas. It says, "It's the best time of the year. Well, I don't know if there will be snow, but have a cup of cheer." Maybe that resonates with you a little, as you sit here and you're in a warm environment, you have warm breakfast, you have your coffee, and you're dry, and you just saw your kids singing these Christmas songs, like, it is the most wonderful time of the year. Sometimes I walk in those, Christmas decorated stores, and this music is blaring, all these Christmas songs, and for a moment it resonates. Christmas time. And then I look down at the baby I'm wearing, and the 2 and the 4-year-old, the energetic 2 and 4-year-old in the double stroller, and then my 6-year-old who wants to touch everything and excitedly talk about everything in the whole store. And I don't know who wrote those songs, but I never want to go shopping again. I'm ready for Christmas to be over. This is crazy. There's just craziness going on. But Christmas is great, right? I mean, we all love Christmas. There's so much to love about Christmas. I was even thinking as I was driving home last night, just seeing the lights everywhere, and everything's just prettier. It brings people together. We celebrate. Just the settings are always, warm and cozy and all that. And of course, most importantly, we are celebrating the birth of Jesus. So it's all good and great stuff. But there's, I think, this the secret other side to Christmas that none of us knew as a kid, and now all of us moms know the other side of Christmas. It starts with the decorations. In theory, that is wonderful and fun. Amen? Yeah, right? And then you go to do it, and it's like a tiny bit fun and a lot of work. A lot of dust, a lot of, just doing it. And then I feel like the month's almost over already, and we have to clean it up soon. And then there's the busyness. Busy, we're all busy people. We probably don't say we have a lot of time throughout the year. And then busy, becomes busier, You don't have extra time, and now you have to be everywhere. You have to be all these places. You have to do all these things. You have these shopping lists, traditions. If you're one of those intentional people that wants to use Christmas and you have all these traditions, where do you get that time? All of a sudden you have more time and more things that need to get done. And then the shopping list. Does it feel like everybody and their mom is on your shopping list? You have the cousins and the sisters and the moms and the grandpas and the neighbors and the teachers, and the list just goes on and on and on. And then your kids, they realize that they're on your list, and maybe throughout your house you're hearing a little more than you want to. This is what I would like for Christmas. Mom, will you please get me this? And even when it comes with the please, there's only so many times you want to hear what your kids want for Christmas. Christmas can be crazy. It's not the fault of Christmas. It's not the fault of the reason for the season. But I don't know. I guess it's our American Christmas can just get a little bit crazy. And there's this one specific aspect I want to talk about. This part that could get crazy is the giving part. And there's 2 sides to it. In one sense, you want to be generous, you want to be giving, you want to be thoughtful. It seems like it's a time where we are told to look around, see the needs around us a little bit more. And then on the other side, there's that other aspect of the giving and the gifts. And it's more, commercial centered, where you see these commercials and you see what you're supposed to get your kids, and your kids see what they're supposed to want. And then there's this, big fat red guy who can give them whatever they possibly want because he has all the money in the world. And just this consumeristic mentality. So there's these 2 aspects of giving, and it's a fine line in the middle. How do we walk that fine line of giving, having that generous mindset, but not going over into that, consumeristic mentality that none of us want to be all about the buy, want, and all of that for both our kids and for us. Well, surprisingly, Santa is going to help us think this through a little bit better. But I don't mean, the big chunky guy that you see over at the mall that's all dressed up. I mean the real Santa. And yes, I'm here to tell you there is a real Santa. But that is not the name that he goes by. I'm sure you know his real name is St. Nicholas. So we're going to look at this historical man of St. Nicholas. You might know a little bit about him, so it might be review for you, but just think through where Santa started from. And it was this guy named St. Nicholas. He was born into a wealthy family in the city of Patara in Lycia. He was a smart boy. His parents were training him to both read and write by the age of 5, and very soon they were a very devout Christian family, and they had him reading not just the Bible, but all these theology books. So this smart kid who's learning all about God's word. And then at the age of 9, his parents died, both of them. We don't know exactly why. It could have been the plague that came around that time, so that was possible. So his uncle ended up raising him from then on. And his uncle was also a devout Christian man, and so he grew up in the truths of God's word, but it wasn't until he was a teenager when it went just from knowing the truth about God's word, believing it in a sense, to really owning it and being a Christian. And that happened soon before, kind of right before he was about to inherit his family's estate. And they were wealthy, so he was about to become a very rich young man. And having just become a Christian, he said, all this wealth, all this stuff that I have, God, I want to use it for you. I want to do whatever you want me to do with it. I'm ready to be generous, basically. And so that's what he did. He was known to be a very generous man. Wherever he went, he just kind of had that reputation that went with him. There is one specific story. There's, a lot of different stories that go on about him, and some of them seem like, okay, maybe that's a little more legend, and, there's some truth to that one. But the one that stuck the most, that seemed to be historically accurate, was about a time where he had a friend from his church that was a merchant, and he lost his job, and he basically had no money at all. He was destitute. He had 3 daughters, and they were of marrying age, which at that time, the family had to pay a dowry in order to send the girls off to be married, and he had absolutely no money. So the girls, the option at the time was not a good option. Most women who didn't get married and didn't have money would end up in servitude, and especially common at that time was temple prostitution. So really, this was a horrible situation for this family and for these 3 girls. And St. Nicholas at the time, was just compassionate. He saw them, he saw the need, he cared about it, and he said, I'm going to do something about this. And so the story goes that he walked through the snow at night with a bag of gold. He took some of his own money, and he came and he secretly dropped it through their window, just enough money for that first daughter to have a dowry in order to become married. And then about a year goes on, the second daughter, she's about to get married or needs to get married and has the same problem, and St. Nicholas does it again. And then the third time around, the dad is looking, who is this person that's coming and dropping off just the amount of money that we need so that our girls are not in major trouble? And he finds Nicholas. And so from then on, his reputation really follows him. Wow, this is a generous man, a sacrificial man. I mean, yes, he's wealthy, but he could be living it up with his money, right? He could be saving that money so that one day down the road, he has the money he needs when he gets older. They don't have retirement back then, all of that. He is sacrificially and generously giving. A little more just to help you picture this real man. He ends up becoming a pastor in the city of Myra. So he's got this church that's growing, that's doing well, but it didn't necessarily go well for him. Diocletian became the emperor at that time, and he's known to be the most severe persecutor of Christians that there ever was. And so he sent all the pastors into prison. And so Nicholas ended up becoming persecuted, flogged, tortured, basically, in prison. And then Constantine came around. He ended up releasing all the pastors from the prison. And that's actually when Nicholas did his most good, was after all that. He started a lot of strong churches. He was a very clear, solid preacher of the Bible. He was known to be arguing for Jesus being God at the Council of Nicaea, if you've heard of that. He was just a dynamic, influential man of his time. And that is probably not who you think of when you think of Santa. I mean, it seems like there is a major disconnect between the Santa we know of today and this historical, real man named Nicholas. So for point number one, I think it will help us as we think about generosity is just thinking of this character more. So put down, know the real Saint Nick, a godly man who found joy in sacrificially giving to others. The real Saint Nick was a godly man who found joy in sacrificially giving to others. And I don't know how we could think about this and not want to know, okay, so how did he become the Santa we know him as today? So we're going to look at that for a second. For quite a while, he was known, Nicholas, more like his real historical figure, who he really was, the real guy. But we got our first American image. You can show that first slide there. In 1810, there was this influential guy who promoted St. Nicholas. He wanted him to be the patron saint, and he had this good artist, show what he might have looked like. And so this was the first American image we have of him right here. And you see there's the stockings, and the reason for that is sometimes the story goes that he came and he dropped the money into their shoes or their stockings, or, they have all these different stories, and that's supposedly where the stocking thing came from. So this is 1810. And then the next picture is from 1821. There was this poem written called The Children's Friend, and he started turning into more of this rewarder of good and bad. I don't know, I read in one article saying that the times were not so great, and society was getting a little chaotic, and they wanted to instill these family values and children being good, and had some kind of flavor of let's use Santa to make society better and help kids do the right thing. So that's where Santa went there, being a rewarder. And then continue to the next one. There's this poem that was written, first called A Visit from St. Nicholas, but now you know it as The Night Before Christmas. That was in 1823 it was written. And that really popularized St. Nick as this round, pipe-smoking elf-like guy. And that had a great influence on the Americanization of St. Nick. The next picture, the late 19th century, there was this cartoonist who gave him the red suit and the white cuffs and the collar and the leather belt, all that we know him as. The next one is in 1905, and you can see he continues to evolve into what we know him. And then the next picture is 1908. And then finally, the one that became most famous is when Coca-Cola did it, and that was in 1931. And they really popularized this look of Santa Claus. So the next one kind of shows the difference. Here's where we started, and this is where we ended. And yes, they look quite different, but they're also quite different in emphasis. St. Nicholas is the one who generously gave for the benefit of others. He was sacrificing. And then there's Santa who, wants to give you whatever you possibly want. And, do what you want with Santa. You don't need to throw things at him when you see him at the mall or whatever. But I would humbly recommend that maybe we get our eyes more on this St. Nicholas character and what we can learn from him. And when we see Santa, think more about this godly, generous man than we do, what our kids are probably told to do in school is write your Santa's wish list. Let's, transfer at least our family traditions a little more to this generous guy rather than the I want thing. So let's think of how we can do that in our family. And specifically, let's think of generosity. The basic definition, if you looked in your Word document, you looked up what generous means. It says, showing a readiness to give more of something, like money or time, than is strictly necessary or expected. Or it's just showing kindness to others. So we'll think of it this morning as a kindness and a willingness to give for the benefit of others, whether that be time, effort, materially, just saying that I am willing to sacrifice for someone else's good. And we know that that's fun. I mean, we've learned that over time, that it brings us joy to give to others. I don't know if you knew that it was Jesus who said it in the book of Acts. He says, it's more blessed to give than to receive. And I'm sure we've learned that. We love giving to our kids. We love giving to our friends. When we can give something and we know they're going to like it, that brings excitement, not just to the person who received, but to us as well. And we don't have to learn that, but we should incorporate that into our family life, into our family traditions. How can we get our kids to love to give? So number 2, we're going to think about how we can teach our kids to enjoy giving. Teach your kids to enjoy giving. And then if you want to turn your page over to the back, we are going to talk about some practical ways that we could add this specifically to our Christmas season. There's 4, descriptions of how we should give that we're going to write down there, but then within each one, I'm going to give you a few practical ideas. If any of them seem like something you might want to try, maybe you could jot it down so you can remember for next Christmas or maybe for the next however many days we have until Christmas. The first one, the first way we should give is to give anonymously. Give anonymously, like Nick did. He didn't do it to become known and to say, hey, look at me, I'm so generous. He did it secretly, and he was trying to do it secretly. And that's such a cool way to give and to learn to love to give, is when you can give without anybody knowing it, and you just get the excitement of purely giving, not the credit that goes with it. And I think our kids can learn that. They can get excited about that. One specific way is through a tradition that I just wrote down as a St. Nicholas Day tradition. December 6th is St. Nicholas Day. And a lot of people do different versions of this. The version I learned from my pastor, that what he does is they talk about St. Nicholas, they read about it, the kids know what it's all about. And the day before St. Nicholas Day, so December 5th, they put their shoes outside of their room, I assume, the hallway. And then parents come by and they put some money inside the shoes. But that money, and the kids know this ahead of time, is specifically to bless somebody anonymously in the next month. To take that money and to go find some way to give it to somebody without them knowing, and do it within the month, just a project that you could be doing. We did it, and we did it as a family where we pooled all the money together, and we made something for a different family. You could try to think of a family who's in need, or just to give joy to somebody else. Tip I have for this is set an alarm to make sure you do it, because my poor children, their first lesson was not generosity, it was patience. Because we would stay up really late, and so we slept longer than they did, and they woke up and they said, there's nothing in our shoes. I felt horrible. So they learned patience until we could find enough ones around our house, because it wasn't like we were giving them like 5s and 10s. So that was a good lesson as well. But set an alarm, make sure you put whatever amount you want before they wake up. All right, another thought is just random anonymous giving. It doesn't have to be specifically this St. Nicholas idea. Just talk to your kids. Who can we go give something to today? Who can we surprise? What can we put on their doorstep? 12 Days of Christmas is a specific idea. Someone did this for us one year, and it was so fun. I don't remember exactly. I think they did the 12 days right before Christmas. It was like 6 years ago, and every day they would secretly, somehow, we could not catch them, put something on our doorstep for 12 different days, and they'd be gone, and we could not figure out who they were. I think we saw them drive away one time, and we eventually put the puzzle pieces together and figured out who this very generous family was. But you could do something like that. We had kids one time when we tried to do it, and we just knew it was not practical to drop off 12 days. With kids, it just sounds really difficult to do it in a secret. So we did 12 days like on a big pile of gifts and dropped it off at one time and gave them specific directions on how to open each, do it on this day, do it on this day, do it on that day. So that's a little more practical with kids. And how much would they love to be a part of that, Have them start it in the month of October or November. It takes the kids a while to write a card or whatever, to do 12 different cards. You don't want them to get, sick and tired of doing it. So spread it out where you're having them think through, how can we bless this specific family for 12 different days. Another idea that I'm sure you've done before is the Secret Santa. Maybe you want to change it from Secret Santa to Secret Sister or whatever. But just secret something, where you have a group of people. This could even just be adults, not kids, but it could be kids with cousins or whatever, where you draw names and you secretly give to that person throughout the month or throughout the week or whatever it might be. The next way to give gifts is to give thoughtfully. Give thoughtfully. A specific idea is just having a family brainstorm session, meaning I know you could come up with what everybody needs and what would be good for everybody, but to get your kids involved, maybe get out a whiteboard and say, all right, Grandma, what can we give for Grandma? What would she like? And just get the kids involved in thinking it through. And maybe you don't use a lot of those ideas, but nonetheless, you're helping them think how to give. Next one is drawing names in whatever capacity you normally give gifts. If each person, each kid, or whoever focuses on one person, they can give a little more thoughtfully than if you have a list of people that you have to go end up buying for. You just kind of go quick and you're thinking, okay, let's check the box with this, check the box with this. Focus in and really think about that person. Another one I put down as mini sibling giving throughout the month. My kids made this up this last Christmas. I mean, it's not a totally novel idea, but they found all our stockings and they put it on all of our doors, our door handles. And so they're using it as mailboxes throughout the month where they're giving each other little things. And, they're doing it on their own, so it's like trash, basically. But it's sweet because they are thinking about that person and they're like, oh, I'm putting this whatever inside their mailbox. And I love when my daughter said, I put something very important in there, something you're going to be looking for. And I'm glad I looked because it was my phone she found and she put within the stocking. But especially if they're little, how fun to just let them be creative on their own and come up with whatever to just give each other all month. They just get in that giving mode. And I think that's what is giving my girls they're learning how to have joy in giving the most because they're doing it on their own. It's not pressured. It's not, go, let's, write this card, let's do this. It's just in their free time, their playtime, they're learning how to come up with whatever to give their siblings or mom and dad. All right, get creative. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money in order to be a generous person. It's that willingness to sacrifice, and that might be time, that might be effort, those sweet gifts that grandparents like often are more in the creative realm than they need to be in the expensive realm. One idea I heard was a handprint platter idea where dad gets paint on his hands and puts it on the bottom of the platter, and then mom, and then each kid until they get younger, and then you could take it wherever and you get it turned into a platter that can be used. Just thoughtful things like that don't cost a lot of money, but that you're just taking time to think through what someone would like. Adopt a family. That could look like really anything, but just where you own a certain family, maybe they're in need, or maybe you just love them and you care about them, and you bless them in whatever way, whether it's bringing them meals, whether it's bringing them baskets, whether it's doing anonymous giving, or even not anonymous giving, where you're just going out of your way with that specific family all month long. All right, the third way is to give of yourself. Give of yourself, like time gifts. Maybe you give them a coupon that says, for Christmas, let me take you out to breakfast and go get your nails done, to a friend, or just a thing where you say, I want to spend time with you, maybe with your spouse, something that they enjoy, where you say, one year I'll go for a round of golf with you for my husband. Just a thoughtful time gift that they would appreciate instead of spending a lot of money. Give of yourself, those coupons, that's a good way to help kids give, is making little coupons. I'm sure they actually have a lot on the internet these days where you looked up, Christmas gift coupons. You could probably find them and personalize them, or just have your kids make them out of those little note cards, 3x5 cards. Lots of different ways to do that. Meals, just another way to show love to someone is to have your kids be involved in helping you make a meal and take it to a family, whether they are having a hard time, whether they're going through a trial, or just because. And definitely get your kids involved in that. Lastly, give sacrificially. Give sacrificially. For our kids, it could be a conversation where we talk about how we are going to, say you normally do 3 gifts, we're going to give up 1 gift this year so that we can all give to this other person or this family. Something where you get your kids involved in realizing we are not going to do this so that we can give this. And you're going to have to help them see the joy in that, help them know why that family needs it, maybe let them see the family open it or whatever so that they see that was worth it. I'm glad I gave up whatever for myself to give to somebody else. And they might not get it right away, but I think as we train them and as we do this more often, they will start seeing the good in it. Give up a toy in order to give it. Yeesh, that would be hard for my girls. And especially if I walk them through not getting rid of a toy that they already don't like. If I help them think through, give something you do like, either to a sibling, you could do it that way, or maybe to a friend or to a cousin or to somebody else, where they take something that actually means something to them and they're willing to give it to somebody else. Give more than what is expected. And, we don't all have the means to give financially in big ways. So that's a general comment, more than expected. Maybe that's in time, maybe that's in effort, and maybe it's financially if you're able to. But just thinking, I'm not just going to give to check the box, to cross it off, to say, I need to give to this person, but I'm going to go out of my way to give more. And then here's an idea I got from someone. It's kind of about giving. Having kids open their presents last. So you're in the family, maybe immediate family, or you could do it with the extended family, however you want. But to have a talk with them ahead of time about how you want them to be patient and to enjoy watching other people open their gifts, and then have them go at least towards the end, if not at the very end. And it might take some practice, it might take some coaching through, but that would be great if they didn't just see the presents and go run and start tearing them apart and thinking, me, 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 and instead they had to stop and they had to watch and they had to pay attention and get excited for other people, and then they get to open their presents. And all of these things are not easy to do. They're not natural to do. I mean, we probably would struggle with some of these things. So it's going to take work with our kids, but it's worth the effort to teach them to enjoy giving. Really quick, a side note, I thought it was worthwhile just to think through teaching generosity throughout the year too. We don't want kids who are just generous in December, just like we don't want to be just generous in December. So I just jotted down a few notes that I'm sure you have your own ways to help teach your kids to share and all that, but in case any of this is helpful for you, teach them to share, and there's no place on your notes for this specifically, but just teach them to share the small things, I think even with you. They trust you, they know that you care about them, that you want their good, and if, specifically fruit snacks, that always comes up, where they have this bag and they have about 10 little items, and just ask them, you don't want one necessarily, or maybe you do, but ask them to share one with you, just to get in the habit of saying, these are mine, I really want them, but I'm going to be willing to share one with mom. And then as they're willing, you encourage them and you praise them. You say, good job, thank you so much for being generous. That means so much to mommy. And just doing that in those daily ways so that they can get practice in considering the concept of giving of something that they really want. Look for opportunities to teach them, encourage them, reward them. Fruit snacks comes to mind again, where I think to teach them, take that moment, especially if they're struggling with it, and remind them that you have an endless supply of fruit snacks. You have all the fruit snacks they could possibly ever want. You can go to Costco and you can buy boxes and boxes of them. And so showing them that when they share, when they're willing to share, their mom wants to be generous with them. I want to be able to give you more, but when I see that you won't share with your sister or when you won't share with mommy, what does that make me think? Does that make me think I want to give you more, or do I want to give you less? And just helping them see that you're in it for their good, and they don't need to hold so tightly to that one piece of whatever it is. And that's actually like a concept that transfers to us with God. When we are willing to give, God wants to be generous back to us. And when we are stingy, God is not pleased with that. And that I always think of it every time. When I teach my kids, I'm teaching that to myself. The word mine. Oh, I don't like that word. But it's a natural word. Some stuff is ours. Some stuff is mine. But to help our kids not go around saying mine, 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 this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. When possible, I try to help my kids say this is ours, like the high chair. My 2-year-old, I guess it's hers for this season, but really it's the Pace's high chair. I mean, every kid has gone through it, and the next kid's going to go through it. So instead of her saying, that's my high chair, actually, it's the Pace's high chair. It's our high chair. And it takes that mindset off of mine, it's mine. Because ultimately, it's not hers. And then I take it sometimes a step further, especially when they struggle to share whatever they have. And I don't do this every time. I don't want to whack them in the head with it. But the concept that really, whose is this stuff? It's not actually mine. It's not actually yours. It's God's. I mean, God is the one who gave us all things. This is God's stuff. And how does he want us to be with it? Does he want us to share and be generous, or does he want us to hold it tightly and to not share and be stingy with it? So sometimes it's worth taking it that extra step and saying, you don't want to share that, but whose is that? So should you be willing to share? And again, a great concept that transfers over to us as adults as well. I don't know. I feel like there's this tough tension, balance that I'm noticing. Another area with my older girls, they are starting to get stuff that is theirs, and I want them to own it. I want them to take care of it, to see it as their stuff in a sense, where they organize it and they own it. So there's that weird tension about how do you do that without and still be generous. And so some thoughts on that. Obviously, we all talk to them about sharing. Sometimes I think the issue is the older one, who might be more responsible, thinks the younger one's not going to take care of it, and that's a legitimate concern. So talking to the older one about how you're going to help the little one take care of it, that you're going to, maybe you have to sit there and be with the little one just to teach the big one to let the little one play with it. And I also sometimes talk to them about if your little sister breaks it, if I think it's best, I can get you a new one. I have that ability to get you a new one if that's the best thing. And sometimes it's that teaching moment about saying, what is more important here? Is it that thing that's so precious to you, or is it your sister? Is it your relationship with your sister? And that's hard for them to really think through, but just entering those thoughts into their mind, is it more worth it that I have a good relationship with my sister and I'm giving to her, or that I hold on to my stuff? Another area where I see this come into play is when the kid is playing with their toy and the other one wants it, and they say, may I play with it? They might even say it nicely, may I play with it, please? How does this kid be generous, but they're playing with it? Different ways to go about that. One is you can say no, but don't say no in a definite, no, you cannot play with my toy. It's more like a no, you can play with it, blink. Give them a future time that they can play with it in a little while. Or in a little while, it kind of gets messy. In 2 minutes, in 5 minutes, and mom has to help with the when is 2 minutes, when is 5 minutes. And then as they get older, I'm noticing that there's some stuff that really is, valuable to them, and it's special to them, and how do you handle that? No hard and fast rule, but me and my husband have talked about where they can say no sometimes, but they have to say yes other times. So it's not a, this is mine and only mine. It's a, well, I'd really like to play with it right now, or I have it in a certain spot right now, but next time they ask, you probably should be willing to say yes pretty soon, and kind of coaching them through. It isn't that black and white issue as much as it's that heart of willing to share, willing to be generous, willing to be kind. And so walking them through that and how to learn that. And then, of course, if we're just being intentional to be generous throughout the year, our kids are going to see that. They are going to grow to love that as they see that we enjoy that as well. So for our kids, it's training ground. We got to instill that in them. They probably don't come out of the womb loving to share, and so we have to help them in that. And for us, we probably will be generous at times. We will give, and we will enjoy giving, but it's helpful to take a step back and look at, is it really done with that right mindset, with that willingness, with that kindness, and maybe even take it a level deeper with why would we do that? Why would we really have that kind of mindset? So that's where I want to go next, making sure we are giving with the right motives. That's number 3. Give with the right motives. And St. Nick, he is a good place to start. As we think to his story, we see that his generosity, it started with a commitment to say, this is my stuff that I'm willing to give. I'm willing to use it for however God wants me to use it. And that might even sound extreme to you, just willingness to give up your stuff. But it actually flows quite logically out of the thought that if God has given me all this stuff, then ultimately it's his. Then I shouldn't hold tightly to it. And I know we've worked hard for our stuff. We've worked hard for our money. We've worked hard for our house. We've worked hard for all the stuff we have. But really, who gave us our life? Who gave us the ability to work hard? Who gave us the mind that we can be smart in order to get the stuff that we got, to have the kind of jobs that we have? God gave us all that stuff, and I know we can see that with our kids. Taking a step back on a human perspective, we can look at our kids and say, everything you have is from me. You wouldn't have life, you wouldn't have food, you wouldn't have clothes, you wouldn't have a house. Yes, you walk to the table, but who bought the table, and who has given you food every day to get you to today to get to the table? We can see it with our kids, but it is more dramatic with God. He gave us the very air that we breathe, the very molecules that make up our body, the brain waves that we have. It's way more dramatic with him, that everything we have is ultimately from him. So it makes sense to be generous, remembering that our stuff is ultimately not truly ours. In a sense, it's ours, but really it belongs to God. And so to remember that your stuff is God's. That's the little dash number, letter A. Remember your stuff is God's, that he has rights over it more than we do. And that should cause us to hold our stuff loosely, to remember to be generous with it, because it's his more than it is ours. But St. Nick's reason went even deeper than that. As a Christian man, as we know he was very familiar with the generosity of God. The generosity that pushes you to be generous yourself. We've already talked about this before this semester in different terms, but just the fact that we are sinful people, and God, he is a holy God. He can't be with sinful people. He is a just God. He has to punish sin. And so ultimately, we are in trouble on our own. We depend on the generosity of God, really. Any of the things that we do in order to become right, to get further with God, none of it even comes close. I think of Christmas and how people, they try to get closer to God. We go to church more, we pray more, we celebrate Jesus' birth, maybe even in our generosity, in our giving, but none of that even gets us closer, even an inch closer to who God is, because he is so holy and beyond us, and all of our sinful attempts don't get there at all. And so we are desperate for the generosity of God because we have a problem. We've got to get to the point where we realize that we are desperate for the solution that God gives us to that specific problem. And then that's when we know and we appreciate the generosity of God. I'm sure you've heard and grew up maybe even with maybe the most famous verse, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his son. And that's where his generosity really comes in. And think about the Christmas scene specifically. We are talking about the God of this universe coming down not just as a human, but as a helpless baby. Picture yourself in that hospital room with your helpless, dirty at first, little baby. And that's God came down in that form, but he wasn't in a clean, sterile hospital room. He was in basically a barn, an animal nasty room. And he was laid inside of a feeding trough. This is the God of the universe coming down. That is generosity. That is love. And he did it so that he could live perfectly the life that we were supposed to live. And then ultimately he lived this life. He did live it perfectly. And then he was beaten. He was mocked. He was spit on, basically tortured, and then killed. God. That is true kindness, and that is true generosity. And when you know that, not just know the facts, but you realize that your life and your eternity is desperate for God's generosity in that way, that's when you can look at your stuff and say, wow, you did that for me, my stuff. whatever you want me to do with it, God. Whoever you want me to give it to. If you want me to give more here or more there, I am totally willing. My stuff is totally yours. That's the second motive that we should make sure we have, is that we are generous because of God's generosity. Be generous because of God's generosity. If you are a Christian, if you say you're a Christian, you got to make sure that's where your generosity springs from. And that's really, really the foundation of how we become a Christian. It's not just saying some special prayer, having some emotional experience at some point in life. It's realizing that you are desperate for what Jesus did, that he lived the life for you and he died the death for you. He paid that punishment that you deserve to have, and so you trust in Jesus for that. And then that comes with a repentance, a turning from living for yourself to live for God, to obey God. That's your new desire. And that is really the last thought that I have as far as being generous, is that we should be generous because we want to obey God, because it's the right thing to do. That's letter C. Be generous because it's the right thing to do. I'm sure you know that. No matter what background you come from, people all over the world, I'm sure, are teaching their kids to be generous, to share, because it's the right thing to do, rather than to be stingy and selfish and keep it all for you. But you got to know that if you say you're a Christian, that being generous is not an option. I have a passage that's up, I'm going to put on the screen. 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 18. Talking to Christians, it says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty or proud, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy." And that kind of brings us back to everything is really God's. They're to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. And then the next passage is 1 John 3:16. That's an easy one to remember. Instead of John 3:16, it's 1 John 3:16. I'll read it through and then I'll break it down. It says, "By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth." That first verse, verse 16, it's basically reiterating that concept that because God gave, we can give. Because God was loving, we can be loving. Because God was generous, we can be generous. And then verse 17, "But if anyone has the world's goods, sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?" How could you say that you have the love of God if you see someone in need and you're not willing to do something? And a quick clarification, it says brothers here. This is talking to a group of Christians. This church is who it's talking to. And it's not saying, everywhere you look, if you see any possible need and you are not willing to meet it, every person on the street corner, if you're not doing something, how can you say God's love is in you? This is talking to a group of Christians saying, if you see a brother, another one like you, someone you know well enough to know that there's a need, and then you're like, whatever, I don't need to take care of that. How could you say God's love is in you? In other words, if you're not willing to be generous, how could you say you're a Christian? Those are harsh words, words that you would see all throughout 1 John, though, if you were to read that. And then the last verse, "Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth." You don't just say it, you've got to live it. And really that's all throughout the Bible, that our Christianity is proven by our actions. Not meaning it's proven where this person doesn't like what you're doing and this person doesn't like what you're doing, and so you're showing yourself to not be a Christian at all. More like God has told us how we should live. In the Bible, it clarifies what Christians are to do, what we should be doing. And if we say, I don't really want to do what God says, or I want to do the easy thing, or I want to go with what's culturally appropriate rather than the Bible, then we're showing ourselves to not be Christians, is what the Bible says. And 1 John go to that book if you're not sure if that's what that says. It's a 5-chapter, small little book that talks about real Christians show it by their lives. We don't obey God in order to become Christians. That would be a fatal misunderstanding, because we see that we can't do anything. We are as we talked about earlier, we're so sinful. God is so holy. Our attempts don't even get us close to God. So it's not that we are trying to earn it or become a better Christian, but it shows. It shows what if we've had true trust and we're trusting in Jesus, we're living for him, it's going to show by our lives. I'm sure you probably thought that generosity, would not be such a heavy topic. But being a generous man like St. Nick doesn't just come because someone decides they're going to be nice. These big, huge, sacrificial actions that a man like that have come from big motives. And as a Christian man, he was doing it because of what God had given him, because God had been generous with him, and so he was ready to be generous with others. And as Christians, we want to emulate that heart. That's the reason we want to be giving. And as we do give in that way, that's probably half of our Christmas busyness is giving. As we give out of a heart like that with those kind of motives, our Christmas season will be way more meaningful. It will have a lot of joy. We'll have so much joy in what we're doing. And really, I think of all those ideas that we could give our kids, that's what they're going to pick up on the most, is do mom and dad, do they enjoy giving? Do they do it out of the overflow of their heart because of what they have been given? And if nothing else, at minimum, I hope that as you see Santa running around all over the place, I've actually never seen him run around. That would be kind of awkward. But as he's sitting all over the place, to look at him and kind of look past him and let him remind you of a godly, sacrificial, generous, kind man that we could all be a little more like if we put more effort into thinking along those lines rather than the me, Santa wish list kind of thing. So hopefully we can all be more generous this Christmas season in a St. Nick way. Thank you.